Hello my little Lunas, you can call me Lovegood, and I hope you enjoy this video. Here are just a few things before we get started. Today, I'm presenting you with Chapter 8 of How to Raise a Child Nemesis, titled An AED is Used Improperly but with Great Success by sabertoothhousecat on AO3. But anyways, thank you for tuning in to listen to me. As always, tags are in the description as well as warnings. But that's enough of my rambles and jambles, and let's get right into the fic. This is the summary. Summary: Izuku's first true vigilante mission, featuring hacking his elementary school, an entire AED, and this random guy with red wings. The day of the abducting, Izuku packed his school bag with stuff he definitely did not need at school, including a length of rope, his vigilante costume, a butter knife — he wanted one of the super sharp kitchen knives but wasn't sure about bringing it to school — a notebook and a pencil, a flashlight, his laptop, several cords, and his phone. He settled it on his back, wincing at the weight. The rope was much heavier than he'd anticipated, and marched downstairs, determined. "It's a bit early, isn't it?" Kurogiri asked doubtfully as Izuku walked into the kitchen. "I want to get a head start on my art project," Izuku said. "My teacher said it's okay." Izuku liked art class, and he had it every Friday. Kurogiri knew this about Izuku, but it was important to solidify, so that if part of Izuku's plan failed and Kurogiri got a call from the front office about Izuku's absence, he would at least think that Izuku had just gotten carried away in the art studio and would find class in his own time. Kurogiri looked doubtfully at the clock. "Kurogiri," Izuku said, drawing out the eyes and giving him a pouting look. A portal opened. Triumphant, Izuku stepped through the mist. He looked up at the school building, the sun just peeking over the horizon, and walked resolutely forward. He had important work to do, even if it was super early. Izuku crouched behind a tree in the parking lot and waited for the first teacher to arrive. When they did, he followed them carefully and slipped in after them when they unlocked the front door. From there, he went straight to the front office and sat behind the desk, opening his computer and connecting it to the big front office laptop with a cord. It was easier than he thought it would be, from there, to hack into the attendance record stuff. He found his class and his name and used a program he'd made on his computer to set his attendance record permanently to present. The idea was that even if the teacher tried to mark him as absent, the front office computer would still show him as present no matter what. Izuku couldn't be sure if the program would work or not, but he'd done what he could with the knowledge he had, which he was starting to suspect was a lot of knowledge, and the program would, at the very least, do something, and if not, there was always his art class alibi. Once that was done, and he was reasonably certain neither Kurogiri nor Oji-san was going to get a call from the front office asking where he was, he unplugged his computer and put it away again. He slung his bag over his shoulder again, snuck out of the office and the school building, and walked to the nearest bus stop. By the time he got to the train station, the train to Tokyo was waiting at the platform. Izuku climbed on board and found his seat. Not 2 minutes later, the train pulled out of the station. Izuku grinned. He'd gotten away with something huge. On the ride to Tokyo, he flipped open his notebook and checked all over the phone numbers he'd carefully copied out. He wished he could predict if there would be someone around whose phone he could borrow, because he would definitely need to borrow a phone. Even he knew that using his phone to call a bunch of heroes was a bad idea. What if it was tracked? If only there was a way to have a phone that he could use and then throw out. What a great thing that would be. When a couple hours later, the train pulled into a station at Tokyo, he put away his laptop and his notebook and threaded his arms through his backpack straps. He checked his phone as he hopped off the train. No panic calls from Kurogiri or not Oji-san. He alarmed himself one moment of glee. His program had worked. Officially, he was still at school, which meant he was a genius. In front of the train station, he found an empty taxi and climbed in the back seat. The driver gave him a strange look, which confused him. There wasn't anything on his face, but he ignored it and rattled off the address of a cafe not far from the kidnapping site. The driver hesitated, looking around outside the car, then back at Izuku. Maybe he hadn't heard the address and didn't want to seem rude by asking again. Izuku said the address of the cafe again and buckled his seatbelt resolutely. With another confused glance at Izuku in the rearview mirror, the driver pulled out of the station. This was all very strange. Izuku decided maybe the driver was not actually a taxi driver and was doing this as a front to cover up his shady undertakings, including selling villains super weapons in the hidden trunk, just like in All Might 5 partners in their prime. He entertained himself with thinking this all the way through on the way to the cafe. Ignoring the looks the driver continued to cast him in the rearview mirror, which grew more and more offended by the kilometre. What Izuku was doing to offend him was anyone's guess. When they got to the cafe, which was in a sketchy-looking neighbourhood, Izuku paid with the credit card Naoji-san had given him and hopped out the taxi. The taxi driver sent him a concerned look, and then glanced around as if waiting for someone else to appear. "Thanks," Izuku said. The driver hesitated, clearly torn between being polite and asking whatever was on his mind. Izuku waited patiently, but the driver gave up, shook his head, and drove off. Weird. Izuku waited for the taxi to be gone before he turned away from the cafe, opened the map app on his phone, and followed it to what was definitely the bad side of town. People on the street kept their heads down and hurried where they were going, not looking around. Izuku shrank towards the buildings, wishing he was just a little bit taller or bulkier, and wishing he knew where he was going so he didn't have to keep serendipitously glancing at the small blue dot on his phone. The destination was a warehouse, which made Izuku very excited because the main climax of All Might 2 Victory Lap had also been in a warehouse. He really was just like All Might, except maybe not as tall or strong. After spending some time peering at the warehouse from a distance and trying to figure out how to best position himself, Izuku turned away, trying to think. Without going into the warehouse himself, he couldn't catch the bad guys, but he also knew he was probably too small to catch so many bad guys all on his own anyway. The area seemed too dangerous to ask someone to borrow their phone. They probably wouldn't give it to him anyway, and he didn't want to use his own phone for reasons aforementioned. His computer programs, so delicately crafted, wouldn't really do anything either. He had rope, a butter knife, and a flashlight in his bag, but what could he do with those? This stumped him for a while. Eventually, he decided he wouldn't be able to do anything without his vigilante costume on, so he fished that out of his bag and put it on before ducking into a small alcove in front of a random door and sitting down on the step to think. He opened his bag and squinted at the rope, the knife, and the flashlight. Perhaps he should have come more prepared. He glanced at the time, still an hour and a half left until the sketchy business deal was slated to go terribly awry. Frustrated, willing his mind to work faster, he pushed his goggles up and pressed the heels of his hands into his eyelids. Stars blinked in the field of black. Then it hit him. Izuku snuck into the warehouse, which some foolish person had left unlocked. He did a full sweep of the building, checking every entrance and exit. He counted steps across it both ways. The warehouse had lots of wooden crates in it. Izuku wasn't strong enough to open any of the crates, so he wasn't sure what was inside, but their presence made the warehouse maze-like and difficult to orient himself in. This would have to be fixed. He found the electrical panel and opened it up. An electrician Izuku was not, but he could see many switches which seemed important. He scouted out a few areas to hide in, came across an AED kit, and discovered the fire extinguisher and alarm. He also uncovered a small family of mice and a broken nail. When he found that he had working knowledge of the contents of the warehouse, he went back to the AED and ripped open the packet with the pads in it, apologizing silently to the next person to have a heart attack in the warehouse. He picked a wall devoid of any exits and climbed up onto a stack of boxes next to it. Flipping on his flashlight, he located a spot he thought was probably around door height, and used one of the AED pads to tape the flashlight there. Unsure how sticky the pads actually were, he used 2 more pads to secure the first pad. The flashlight sent a dull glow up toward the ceiling. Pleased, Izuku hopped down and hurried to the front of the warehouse. He climbed on top of a box by the door to get as high as possible and pulled his long rope out of the bag. He made a loop out of the top of it and slung it over the emergency light over the door. This took a few tries, but eventually he managed to get the rope around the emergency light and he pulled the slip knot tight. Tugging on the rope didn't yield the results he was looking for, so he carefully wound the rope around his arms a few times and jumped off the crate, pulling the emergency light down and a good portion of the wall. He flinched as he hit the ground, covering his head, but the chunks of wall and lights mostly missed him. Good progress, Izuku decided. He picked up all the items, tucked them away behind a crate, and made his way to do the same all to the other emergency lights. The process earned him 1 scratch on the cheek and a deep shortness of breath. but otherwise he found himself unharmed and exhilarated by his success. The time had inched closer to the meetup, so Izuku found a likely crate to hide behind near the electrical panel and circled up into a ball, checking that he had his costume on properly and that his bag was secure on his back. As he waited, he untied the slip knot from his rope and carefully retied the rope around the handle of his butter knife. He made several thick knots to hold it in place, and decided that as soon as he got home he was going to order himself a big book on knot tying. Knowing how to do a slip knot and a normal knot was definitely not enough. Izuku heard the voices at the front of the warehouse and hugged his knees tighter to his chest. The voices were still too far away and too muffled to hear what they were saying. When they didn't come any closer, Izuku realized he was going to need to adjust his plan on the fly. He dug into the AED kit again, found the biggest, bulkiest item, the actual AED itself, silently apologized again to the future dying soul who needed an AED, and carefully started climbing up the crate he was hiding behind. He stood on top of the crate and peered over the edge to see who had come inside. A person wearing an orange shirt, a tall hat, and a mask was standing just inside the front door next to another, very normal and average-looking man wearing a bored expression. The bored man flipped the lights on and Izuku tensed, waiting for them to look over and see him. Luckily, they didn't seem to suspect anyone else who was inside. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but neither of them looked like the HPSC guy they were supposed to be abducting, so Izuku figured he still needed to wait. And wait he did, for an excessive amount of time, until the orange shirt man and the bored man had both given up on standing by the door and had started sweeping the warehouse to make sure no one was inside. Izuku found himself very grateful suddenly that he was on top of the crate and not next to it. Finally, a car pulled up in front of the warehouse and the abductee-to-be stepped out of the car. He was followed by a teenager with bright red wings and sunglasses, who looked decidedly unhappy to be at the warehouse. Abductee-to-be gestured at Red Wings to wait outside, much to Red Wings' clear displeasure, and walked inside. The bored man shut the door behind him. The two of them walked deeper into the maze of boxes, talking in low voices. Izuku watched them carefully over the top of the crates. Abductee-to-be suddenly raised his voice, and the orange shirt man stepped forward, talking in what he probably thought was a soothing voice, and was actually very creepy. Abductee-to-be sent both of them slightly panicked looks, backing away. He stepped straight into a crate, nowhere to run. Now, Izuku tracked the AED as far as he possibly could. It made it further than he anticipated, falling to the ground with a clatter, and skidding across the floor. Everyone looked in that direction, and Izuku slipped back off the crate as the bored man went to investigate. Checking that the rope really was secure around the handle of the butter knife, Izuku took a deep breath and stabbed the knife straight into the electrical panel. The panel sparked, and Izuku stepped back immediately, freaking out a little. The lights flickered on and off quickly, like they were trying to decide what to do, before one by one they shut off. Someone yelled deep in the warehouse, as the entire place went dark, save for the flashlight beaming upward on a random wall, like it marked an exit. It did not. Izuku just needed more time. He traced his hand along the wall, counting steps as he ran for the fire extinguisher, which was too heavy for him to lift. But right next to the fire extinguisher was something that he was more than capable of using. His hand found the handle and he pulled. Blaring sound echoed through the warehouse as the fire alarm started wailing. Izuku slapped his hands over his ears, wincing, but he needed both his hands and he knew it. The door to the warehouse slammed open and Red Wings flew in, looking entirely full of rage. Izuku darted out for the crates and pointed straight at the flashlight he'd left up on the wall, protecting his free ear with his shoulder. "Over there!" Izuku shouted. Red Wings gave him a deeply confused look, but flew in that direction straight away. Now, Izuku needed to get out of it as quickly as possible before more heroes showed up, and found out the amount of damage he'd done to an AED and all the emergency lights. He sprinted for the open door. "Not so fast," someone hissed, and a fist to the side sent Izuku flying into a nearby crate. Kachan's punches, Izuku had learned, hurt pretty bad. This hurt much, much more. It took him a second to remember how to breathe, blinking shock out of his eyes. He rolled away from the approaching bored man, who no longer looked bored, and forced himself back up to his feet, curling over his injured side. "Hi," he said, backing away. "You look pretty mad." "I am pretty mad," the bored man said, approaching menacingly. Izuku felt very short and small. It occurred to him that he hadn't really developed an exit plan. He was all short of rope, butter knife, and flashlight. Izuku heard a frustrated shout from the other side of the warehouse. The bored man didn't even look, still moving forward. Izuku kept stepping back, towards the exit, afraid to run because his ribs were throbbing and he thought the bored man could probably catch him quickly if he did, and then it would all be over. It occurred to Izuku that he might be about to die. The bored man lunged for him, and Izuku barely stepped to the side in time, ribs screaming in protest. His shoulder got clipped, and he stumbled back, eyes wide with panic. This was really not good. He tried to remind himself he was being a hero, and sometimes heroes did scary things, but he was too busy not dying for the reminder to stick. The bored man grabbed him by the elbow and slammed him into a crate. The back of Izuku's head hit the wood hard, and his vision blurred. "How old are you anyway?" the bored man asked. 8. That was simply offensive. Izuku opened his mouth to snap at him for it, but didn't get the opportunity before a red feather hissed through the air and caught the bored man by the back of the shirt, pulling him off Izuku. Izuku threw a glance down at the maze of crates and found Red Wing standing down there, supporting abductee-to-be and glaring at the scene. Izuku figured this was as good a time as any to run away as fast as possible. He turned, adjusting his backpack straps, and fled straight out the door. A feather chased him, and he panted, "Please go away." The feather did not go away. "I'm like 8, Izuku lied, although it wounded him to say, "My mom doesn't know I'm over here. I'll get in so much trouble." The feather still did not go away, but it did slow down considerably, letting Izuku get the best of it. Izuku ran as fast as he could down sketchy streets, vision blurring with tears from the sharp, unignorable pain in his side, until he found the cafe he'd made that random taxi driver drop him off at. He ducked inside the shop, pulling off his hat and his goggles, found an empty seat and collapsed, gasping for air against the protesting of his ribs. The lady sitting at the table next to him gave him a weird look, and he buried his face in his arms, trying to catch his breath without looking like a crazy person. That, he decided, had been awful. He'd almost died. He was convinced that this was true. He replayed the whole scene in his head as his breathing slowed. His ribs really hurt. Red Wings had been very cool. His ribs really hurt. As his body sank into a calmer state, he reconsidered. No, actually, he mused, that had been frickin' awesome. All for One was already frustrated when Kurogiri called him out into the kitchen. His plans had, according to Mr. Compress, been completely foiled by some kid wearing an all-might beanie and a pesky up-and-coming HPSC side project. It was probably a one-off occurrence, but it was irritating. He wouldn't have another shot at that HPSC representative in a long time. Not only that, but one of his loyal subordinates had been arrested, and Mr. Compress had barely made it out himself. So, when Kurogiri called him out of his office, a deep anxiety in his voice, All for One was really not in a good headspace. He walked out of his office to find Midoriya whispering pleadingly, "It really is nothing, Kurogiri. Really. Don't tell Oji-san." Which, naturally, did not improve his mood. "What is it?" he demanded, looking between them. Midoriya gave him a guilty look. He had a deep cut on his cheek, dry blood crusted beneath it. "He's favouring one side," Kurogiri said. "I'm not. It's really fine," Midoriya promised. "Nothing's wrong at all." He continued providing excuses. All for One, not willing to argue with the 10-year-old over whether or not he was injured, used a quirk to do a quick scan, and then froze. "Midoriya," he said, trying to be very calm. "Izuku," Midoriya corrected, shoulders slumping as he resigned himself to the knowledge All for One had stumbled across. "Why is one of your ribs broken?" Midoriya winced. "Broken?" Kurogiri gasped, fluttering over Midoriya even more than he had before. "What happened? Why didn't you tell me? I'll get some ice." "Don't," All for One told him wearily. Kurogiri was like a mother hen sometimes. Ridiculous. "Is it those kids at school again?" Midoriya frantically shook his head, eyes very wide, then hesitated and nodded, then quickly cut that short by shaking his head again. "Make up your mind," All for One said. "Nope," Midoriya said, clearly lying, given the precedent. All for One gave Kurogiri a weary look. "I'm going to call the school." "No thanks," Midoriya squeaked. "I don't want my classmates to die." Kurogiri hushed him. "No one's going to die." After he said it, he cast All for One a doubtful look, verifying if that was true. All for One was not against the idea of Midoriya's classmates dying, but fine. "I just want to make sure this doesn't happen again." "They already got in trouble," Midoriya said, also clearly a lie. Or All for One would have gotten a call from the school that one of Midoriya's ribs was broken. They would need to work on Midoriya's poker face and ability to cover for himself. Actually, All for One reconsidered. They definitely should not do that. "Plus, you can just heal it, right? So it's fine." For a moment, All for One considered leaving it broken just to prove a point. It was just a fracture. Midoriya would live. But then he thought that was probably a good example of how to be a terrible fake uncle, so he sighed and gestured Midoriya forward. Beaming, Midoriya pulled up the hem of his shirt to let All For One do his work. The side of his rib cage was swollen and red. All For One silently vowed that the child who did this would get what was coming to him, and healed Midoriya's side. Midoriya relaxed as it was healed, expression stilling. It had probably been very painful. All For One tried to hide his worry about this deep into his subconscious, where he wouldn't have to consider why he was concerned for this random kid. He was somewhat successful. "Face," he said, gesturing for Midoriya to let him heal the cut on his cheek. Midoriya readily presented the injury to him. All For One frowned at the cut. It was clearly a couple hours old. And what kind of school let a kid walk around with an obviously bleeding face? He shook his head at the rampant quirkism in today's society and healed the cut. "Now go do your homework," he ordered. Midoriya saluted, then hesitated. His eyebrows contorted like he was engaged in solving the biggest moral puzzle of all time. "What is it?" All For One asked. Slowly, carefully, almost like he couldn't believe his own bravery, Midoriya reached his skinny arms out and wrapped them around All For One. All For One had never been more taken off guard in his life. He stiffened, unsure of what to do. Midoriya slumped further into the hug, body shaking slightly. Glancing at Kurogiri for instructions, which he evidently did not have, All For One gave Midoriya an awkward pat on the back. Midoriya let go. "It feels a lot better now," he said, sniffling a little. So thanks." All For One stared at him. Kurogiri stared at him. Midoriya wiped his eyes, sniffling again, and climbed up the stairs to his room. Inside his head, very quietly, All For One screamed. Alrighty, my little loners, that's a wrap of this one. So, first mission for Izuku, we've got Hawk's mention, Mr. Compress mention, love that. We got more of Kurogiri being a mother hen, Izuku showing his, intelligence and, what's it called, plan making? To come up with things on the spot. So, yeah, that was really cool. This is the author's favorite chapter, according to the author's notes. It says, that this is their favorite chapter, so that's cool. Again, I love the chapter. Yeah. So, my little learners, this is the reminder you might have something you need to check. I hope you will have a fantastic time, wherever and whatever you may be. Day, night, dust, storm, low tide, high tide, whatever it is for you. You can call me Lovegood, and that was Chapter 8 of How to Raise a Child Nemesis, titled An AED is Used Improperly but with Great Success, by sabertoothhousecat on AO3. Again, the link to this fic will be in the pinned comment by me on this video, and tags are in the description, as well as warnings. Bye, little learners.